a delight for me to pick up from there with the guide to obtaining court documents in overseas jurisdictions. And many of the same principles that the Prof said apply in Nigeria also apply internationally. You know, courts are public space, court documents are a public right, you are entitled to those documents, you're entitled to attend court sessions, principle of open justice. Where I think primarily where the two main jurisdictions we're going to show you today differ, so the UK and the US, is that court records are digitized. It is possible from the comfort of your pajamas at home to access court records in both of those jurisdictions. You don't have to go to the courts in the same way as you do here in Nigeria. However, that sounds wonderful in theory. In practice, it can be fraught with challenges. And I think the two principal challenges are, one, it is expensive to search. So basically, you often, in the UK, particularly egregiously, they actually charge you per minute you spend searching. So you might not even know what you're looking for, but you're being charged. And in the US, they also charge you per, yes, the British, the entrepreneurs, the shopkeepers of the world, they know how to make money. And then in the US as well. And that, of course, also presents problems because how do you, as a Nigerian sitting in your pajamas at home, trying to search these company races, actually pay for this stuff? So again, you would need basically a credit card linked to these accounts. And in some cases in the past, I'm not sure what the situation is now, but certain credit cards don't work. You know, they might only take Visa, not MasterCard. There might be, you know, a block on, you know, foreign credit cards or whatever. But just bear in mind, those are the two things that you'll need a credit card, and that it is expensive to access the information. Let's see if I can take this any further without actually showing you guys what to do. Okay, so let's talk about the UK. The UK is a major centre for international civil or commercial disputes to be settled in the UK courts. What you will often find is that two big politically connected businessmen who don't trust the courts in their own countries to settle a dispute will bring it to London, where supposedly neutral, independent courts will then decide between the two parties. And the beauty of that is a lot of this information, of course, is therefore publicly available. And if you know where to look, you can find all the juicy details about how these two big elephants you know, have come to be fighting, and the claims and the counterclaims. So the UK is very useful in that regard. Great. And you will also find in the UK courts, you know, maybe some smaller cases being settled in the courts. So ownership over property or assets, etc. Divorce cases where, you know, maybe a wife or a husband has brought a suit against their partner. And buried within the annexures, etc., can be a lot of juicy documents which is evidence sometimes of assets and how money was moved. And there is one additional beautiful thing about court documents that I don't think the Prof mentioned, which is that a court document is a legally privileged document, which means that you as a journalist, or you as an activist, or you as law enforcement, there's a degree of guarantee that if you use that document, you know, you cannot be sued for citing that document. You know, it has that kind of stamp of approval of a court. Obviously, you have to apply your critical faculties. People aren't necessarily, just because a case is in court doesn't mean somebody is not lying, but at least documents don't lie. Documents tell a crucial story, and documents can be found in court papers. So, in the UK, these kind of civil or commercial court cases tend to be heard in two main courts. One is the Royal Courts of Justice, the other is the Rolls Building, and essentially just slightly different kinds of commercial cases are heard, disputes are heard in each one of those. I believe this presentation has been shared in your packs, the URLs are there, and it's quite easy and accessible. So, the key thing to So what I've shared here is these are basically the court rolls. So on any given day, in the Royal Courts of Justice and in the Rolls Building, you can browse what cases are being heard in court on that day. And in our case, sometimes, well, actually, the beauty of it is that it's published the day before. So we actually monitor these court rolls every single day, see if there are cases coming up the following day. If it's of interest, we hurry down to court to listen to it live. But that isn't always possible. Sometimes, the case has already been, aspects of the case have already been heard. Obviously, you can't just hop on a plane overnight from Lagos necessarily to be in the Rolls Court building in the morning to hear stuff. So what do? Well, you can search something called the Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunals e-filing, or CE file, for kind of records of ongoing cases. When you type in the link up here, it will take you to a page that will require you to register. So many of these search engines just require a basic registration. Once you register, you'll get a window that is a little bit like this, and you can search for, you can do a public search for a case. This is the one that I was telling you about that is really, really expensive. You basically load up almost airtime into the system, and it eats your money fast. So basically, you can buy chunks of 15 minutes of searching time, and it costs about 5,000 naira just to search for 15 minutes. And if you don't know the parties of the case, or who is suing who, or the case number, you can waste a lot of money. So my advice to you is to try and know as many details of who the two parties are that are suing each other and the case number before you even start giving the British government money that you don't have for rubbish. Okay. There is a way to save time and money, and the key, it would apply just as much in Nigeria if you're trying to save time dealing with recalcitrant public officials as it would on an electronic court search system where you're just trying to save yourself money and sanity, which is to get the case number. That is the key that unlocks the entire case files when you're searching for it. And the easiest way I find to do this is actually to try and contact one or other of the parties or their legal representatives and say, can you assist me with the case number for this case? I'd like to report on it accurately, etc. That also brings me to another hack, which by hack I mean I kind of work through the system without having to do this, is just make friends with one or other or both of the parties that are fighting each other in court. And very often you'll find they're actually quite willing to give you their filings pretty much for free, to save you having to go through the courts. And I often approach them and say, look, I'm a journalist. I really want to cover this case. I think the best way to do it is to read all the court filings so that I'm accurate and fair to all parties. But it's really, really expensive and difficult to find the court documents. Can you send me the stuff? And then if that relationship develops well and they send me stuff, it's sometimes possible to even ask them to send the other side's filings as well. Because remember, these two legal sides are exchanging each other's cases the whole time. So it's just a tip that you can get these things without ever having to go to court or fight with the system. But should you, in this case, need to search, get the case number, and on this screen, instead of going public search that takes you through to basically 5,000 naira per 15 minutes, if you do the second tab down, which says create office copy request, and put the case number in the box there, you will get the list of all the filings in reverse chronological order. So in this case, I took the case number of the civil claim where the Federal Republic of Nigeria is suing JP Morgan Bank for its negligence in paying out the better part of $1 billion to Malabu without doing proper due diligence on who was Malabu, were they legitimate, were their bona fides correct. And of course, this is now a big civil case in the UK where these two parties are fighting. And what I have here is every time that there is some kind of a legal skirmish in the courts, it generates a document, so one side's filings in a particular case, or another the side's reply, or a judgment. And what you do, you just cherry pick the documents you want down this column by just clicking on the main ones that you think are valuable. The useful things to get are both sides' filings and any significant judgments that the judge has made. And then you add it to your basket at the bottom here. And I have bad news for you. You need deep pockets for these deep baskets. So you probably can't see, but you know, the most recent order by the judge on the 30th of September is going to cost you £10 to get hold of. I can see there are some documents here that cost as much as £30. So it is expensive. Let's talk about if there is a criminal case in court. So this would differ from, you know, Federal Republic of Nigeria versus JP Morgan fighting this dispute about whether the bank had been negligent around payout of that 1 billion to Malawi. In criminal court cases, this is where the UK law enforcement is now basically prosecuting somebody for a criminal act. And there have been cases in the past where Nigerian nationals, politically exposed persons, have been basically criminally investigated in the UK. There is a pending case at the moment, for example, against the former oil minister Diazani and others. And the majority of these cases are heard in London because the main UK law enforcement is obviously based in the capital. And there are kind of 3 or 4 main courts where, again, on a daily basis, we monitor the courtroom list to see what is coming up in terms of cases. And those are the ones there. You've probably have all heard of the famous one where criminal cases are heard, which is the Old Bailey. And then just bear in mind that journalists are entitled to certain documents from the courts. So that's how to track criminal cases in the UK. It's actually, to my knowledge, it's not, you can't search for criminal cases in the same way as you can search for the records of civil claims. You would probably have to be in court to hear the cases on an ongoing basis. But if you know it's happening, you can get a colleague in the UK to go and attend, and you can also find out who the lawyers are and begin to get information that way. Let's talk about the US court system. What you want here is something called PACER, which is their court electronic records system. Again, you have to register an account first, and it's a bit of a painstaking process. Effectively, you register for a user account. It takes them about 10 days to process your application, and it's all paper-based. The weird thing about the US I've noticed is that despite it supposedly being a first world country, they are very much still reliant on exchange of paper between parties. So you might have to wait a while and actually do your stuff with them, register for stuff using forms that you post off and back. And again, there's a cost associated, so 10 US cents per page that you download. Let's talk about a case that peripherally involves the former oil minister. So in July 2017, the US Department of Justice tried or started a process of trying to claw back the assets that various individuals who had benefited from contracts issued by Diazani Alassane Madweke's oil ministry had acquired in the US. Now, how do we actually go about finding exactly what the US Department of Justice case was against some of these individuals? So PACER is the one to look for. And once you have an account, PACER looks a little bit like this. You remember I said you have to write up to PACER and exchange over some kind of paper-based correspondence access to an account. But once you get that account, you would log in, and you get to a page that looks a little bit like this. And what you're doing when you're searching for something is you want to find the parties involved in a case. So once you're in, you go to Find Parties Advanced. And in this case, we're looking at an asset owned by Cola Luco. It's this massive yacht, right? It's like a $60 million yacht. Talk about, you know, placement, layering, integration, and then enjoying the proceeds, right? This is a classic case. And in this case, the US Department of Justice sued an entity called the NY Galactica. It's the name of the company that owned this Galactica-style yacht. So you can search for NY Galactica as a party. By party, I mean, you know, party to this case. And you would get a result that includes the party that is being pursued, the case title, name of the court, so the Texas Southern District Court, and you know, when the case was filed, etc., etc. What is really handy is accessing underlying documents. So, look for the docket report, and run the report tab at the bottom there. You'll get something that looks a little bit like this. And when you run the report, in a similar way with CE file, you get the list of every document filed in this case, which includes the original complaint by the US Department of Justice against, you know, the various parties involved, and every subsequent kind of legal filing or notice. Including exhibits. Remember, the gold lies in the exhibits, the documents that each party attaches to their case as, you know, proof of their arguments. And those documents, again, are legally privileged. They're documents, they don't lie, no matter what, you know, sources are claiming about them. So, in amongst these lists of things, what is really useful in the US that does not apply to the UK is you can actually find transcripts of the various hearings where people, you know, were arguing in court one way or another, including witnesses. So I don't know, in fact, I think in this case, Mr. Luco didn't ever testify in court, but it's good to know that you can actually get the he said, she said of what record of what happened in court on any particular day here. For the cost of 10 US cents a page, it can add up. A little bit about court cases around the rest of Africa. Here are some links to websites that are historical repositories of judgments. So these won't give you the blow-by-blow court case documents, etc. But what they will give you is what the judge's final verdict was. So these are for African courts. This is a South African court. This is internationally court. There's another one called Bailey, B-A-I-L-L-I, and that's for UK courts. And that's kind of handy in terms of digitizing, at the very least, international judgments around Africa and around the world. Yeah, that's my presentation on UK and US courts, although Nick would like to take